Brooke Logan's world shifted the moment the doctor's soft-spoken words broke through the sterile stillness of the examination room. Early-stage nasopharyngeal carcinoma. In that instant, the familiar corridors of Forrester Creations blurred into insignificance, and every fiber of her being trembled with the weight of an unspoken terror. Yet even as her chest tightened with the first pangs of fear, Brooke resolved to bear this burden alone. Ridge needed her whole focus. His vision for the company, the upcoming investor pitch, the fate of the summer haute couture line depended on the strength she radiated, the rock he relied on. To falter now would be tantamount to betrayal. So she returned home, her steps measured and confident, masking the ache in her throat with practiced smiles, assuring Ridge that nothing was amiss. Each night she lay awake, the diagnosis replaying like a phantom at the edge of her consciousness, but she never let Ridge glimpse the tremor in her hand as she poured herself a glass of water, never let him hear the small, strangled catch in her voice. Days blurred into weeks as Brooke endured rounds of radiation in silence, convincing Ridge that her fatigue was the price she gladly paid to see him succeed. He scarcely questioned the occasional early morning absences or the brief slips in her usually boundless energy. After all, creative minds could be capricious, and the deadlines were suffocating. Meanwhile, Ridge harbored his own secret, one he believed would strengthen their future rather than threaten it. In collaboration with Taylor Hayes, his confidant and former love, he had quietly purchased a substantial stake in a promising fashion tech startup, one whose revolutionary wearable technology promised to reshape the industry. Together, Ridge and Taylor had negotiated a multi-million-dollar contract, binding Forrester Creations' future to the success of a fledgling company whose legal and regulatory framework remained untested. Ridge convinced himself that this daring move would propel the legacy brand into the digital age, that risk and reward were inseparable in the world of couture. He structured the deal with surgical precision, convinced that Taylor's keen intellect and his own industry clout would safeguard every contingency. Brooke, in her self-imposed exile of silence, remained blissfully unaware of Ridge's high-stakes gamble. She devoted every ounce of her dwindling strength to her family, insisting that their children, the triumphant relaunch of the Beacon Hills collection, and the upcoming corporate retreat at the beach house take priority over her private ordeal. But cancer, relentless and unforgiving, advanced like a thief in the night. What began as a tickle in her throat morphed into pain that no longer yielded to her most valiant efforts at composure. One morning, she awoke to find her voice fractured, every swallow a sear of fire. It was the wake-up call her denial could no longer ignore. Alone in the hospital corridor, she pressed the crumpled medical report to her chest and realized that the secrets she bore were no longer hers to keep. That evening, at the grand boardroom table where Ridge stood confidently presenting the metrics of their latest market research, Brooke's knees buckled. The room froze as she rose, her face drained of color, her lips trembling. She cleared her throat, her voice a brittle echo of its former strength, and confessed, "Ridge, I have cancer." The words fell like stones, and Ridge's world splintered in that moment. His composed facade shattered as he rushed to her side, eyes wide with disbelief, love, and guilt in equal measure. She told him everything, the fatigue, the pain, the fear of becoming a liability to the man she loved above all else. He took her hands in his, grief and fury warring in his gaze, fury that she had suffered alone, and grief for the torment he saw etched on her face. But before they could find solace in each other's arms, Brooke uncovered the second blow. In Ridge's overflowing briefcase lay the contract that bound Forrester Creations to the startup, tens of millions, legal contingencies. intellectual property clauses that risked forfeiture of Forrester's core assets should the venture falter. Ridge stammered through excuses, affirming that he and Taylor had every intention of honoring the legacy he had inherited, that he had consulted legal experts, that Taylor's involvement guaranteed fiduciary oversight. Yet Brooke's trust, so painstakingly crafted over decades of shared battles and triumphs, cracked under the weight of simultaneous betrayals. Secrets meant to protect had instead erected walls between them and the revelation that Taylor, Ridge's former wife, his beloved friend, Brooke's trusted ally, had been complicit in this clandestine gamble felt like dagger blows buried in the depths of Brooke's heart. In the tear-streaked stillness of that boardroom, the foundation of Brooke and Ridge's marriage, fractured. Ridge, enraged by Brooke's silence, realized at that moment that his own deception could cost him everything. He had gambled not only with the company's future, but also with the love of his life. Brooke, her hand pressed against the contract's glossy pages, felt betrayal burn hotter than any treatment she had endured. She looked at Ridge, eyes blazing despite tears. "You hid this from me when I was fighting for my life," she whispered, voice raw with pain. Ridge's shoulders sagged under the weight of his mistakes. The room, once a temple of corporate triumphs, echoed with the sound of two hearts colliding: love and ambition, loyalty and fear, truth and deception. In the days that followed, Forrester Creations teetered on the brink. Board members urged Ridge to step back and focus on his wife's health. Legal counsel demanded renegotiation or immediate withdrawal from the deal to protect the company's assets. Brooke, her treatment intensifying, fought for clarity. She insisted on full transparency, demanding access to every document, every meeting note, every digital footprint of Ridge and Taylor's venture. Taylor, caught in the crossfire, found herself torn between her affection for Ridge and her long-standing friendship with Brooke. She defended the startup's promise, argued that innovation required boldness, that the deal had been structured to minimize risk, and yet, in Brooke's eyes, justifications rang hollow. Love, it seemed, could not survive when trust was eclipsed by secrets. One starlit evening, Brooke and Ridge faced each other in the echoing halls of the estate, the faint hum of the city lights outside a distant lullaby. Brooke's features were gaunt, but her gaze was unwavering as she spoke of love battered by fear. Ridge's voice wavered as he promised to make amends, to dissolve the contract, to devote himself to her recovery, to rebuild the trust their marriage had sustained through so many storms. But Brooke knew that words alone could not heal the fissures concealed beneath decades of shared history. As she sank into Ridge's arms, the magnitude of their darkness enveloped them, a darkness born not of malice, but of love's desperate attempts to shield itself from pain. In that embrace, they confronted the truth that sometimes the cost of protecting those we love most is paid in the currency of heartbreak, and that the only path forward lay in the brutal honesty they had long evaded. The dawn that followed was neither a return to bliss nor a simple triumph of resilience. Instead, it was a fragile truce, a mutual acknowledgement that the night's revelations had forever changed them, that love would require rebuilding from the shattered fragments of their secrecy. Brooke resolved to face her illness with Ridge by her side, to fight not only for her life, but for the legacy of trust they had risked losing. Ridge vowed to disentangle Forrester Creations from the perilous contract, to stand guard over the empire his family had forged, and to ensure that no partnership would ever again jeopardize the woman whose voice, vibrant and strong, he cherished above all. In the fierce light of their darkest night, Ridge discovered a new foundation. Forged in truth, tempered by vulnerability, and illuminated by the enduring promise that even the deepest wounds can, with time and honesty, give rise to love's most profound rebirth. Nick Marone's black SUV rolls to a silent stop on the driveway of the Forrester estate late in the afternoon light, the horizon beyond the ocean tinged with bruised purples and grays, as though nature itself is mourning. He steps out, his trousers creased from travel, his broad shoulders stiff with emotion, and pauses at the edge of the manicured lawn, where topiaries cast long, distorted shadows across the cobblestones. The grand facade of the mansion feels hollow now, its windows darkened by grief, its warmth drained by the news that rippled through Los Angeles like a shock wave. Brooke Logan has passed away, succumbing after the complications of her surgery. Nick breathes in a ragged sigh and pushes through the front doors, their polished wood gleaming beneath the chandelier's dim glow, every step echoing in the hushed hall as if the house itself awaits his approach with bated breath. In the great living room, Ridge Forrester stands before the fireplace, shoulders slumped, hands absently twisting the hem of his jacket. His profile is rigid, jaw clenched, eyes hollowed by a grief so profound that even the sharp lines of his designer suit seem to sag under its weight. Taylor Hayes stands near him, her hand resting lightly on Ridge's arm, an anchor of gentleness amid the storm, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute, as though she has steeled herself to bear any burden that Ridge can no longer shoulder alone. When Nick crosses the room, every step feels like wading through water, each heartbeat a tolling bell marking the end of something irretrievable. Ridge turns, the flicker of recognition extinguishing into a landscape of pain, and for a moment they stand before each other in the vast silence, two men bound by a love they both shared and a woman they both cherished. Nick inhales, voice rough as he greets him. Ridge. Ridge barely nods, his throat working once, and Taylor watches with a quiet intensity, bracing herself for the storm that follows. Nick steels himself. I came to say goodbye. Ridge's eyes flicker with something unspoken, a trembling between gratitude and reproach, and he gestures toward the fireplace. Nick moves to stand by the hearth, heat curling around them as though trying in vain to thaw the ice of shared loss. He clears his throat, gaze fixed on the dancing flames, and begins in a low, unwavering tone. Brooke was the brightest light I've ever known. She was fire and grace, fury and forgiveness, all wrapped into the most beautiful soul. And I was selfish. I came to Los Angeles once hoping to convince her to choose me over Ridge, but what I found was that she had already chosen so many things: love, family, loyalty, and a destiny that reached far beyond my ambition. Ridge watches as Nick's hand drifts to the ornate mantel, fingertips brushing over the wedding photograph of Brooke and Ridge, their smiles radiant and genuine. I thought I was risking everything to win her heart, Nick continues, voice thick, but the greatest risk I ever took was not convincing her to stay with me, but letting her go when she needed to follow her own path. And I'll carry the regret of not being able to protect her in the end. Ridge's shoulders jerk as though Nick's words strike him physically, and Taylor's hand tightens on Ridge's arm before she releases him to step closer to Nick. The two men now form a ragged triangle around Taylor, connected by grief yet divided by love and loss. Taylor's voice is soft but steady. She loved us both, in her own way. She believed in you, Nick, even when Ridge seemed like the only constant in her life. Nick's head dips, eyelashes damp with tears he won't let fall. I know, he says, voice breaking. And I believe that in another life, in another world, she and I might have had that chance. But this life, I see now how she needed to stand by Ridge, how she needed to be his partner through everything, even the worst. I just wish I could have been there for her, for all of you, in her final moments. The room is so still that the crackling of the fire seems magnified, each pop like a solitary cry. Ridge inhales slowly, gaze drifting to the oversized clock on the mantel, its ticking seeming to echo the relentless march of time that carried Brooke away. Finally, his voice comes, raw. You didn't fail her, Nick. None of us could have stopped what was coming. She was strong, fiercely so, and she fought until the very end. But cancer is a war without mercy. He turns his head toward Taylor, and then back to Nick. Thank you for coming. Nick nods, swallowing the lump in his throat, and takes a step back as though to signify his leave-taking. For a heartbeat, none of them speaks, and then Ridge's hand hovers uncertainly before settling on Nick's shoulder, a silent benediction. Beyond them, in the grand foyer, a uniformed attendant appears to usher a folded American flag from the parlor, the same flag that draped Brooke's casket at the funeral down the coast, a final tribute to a life that had given so much. Nick watches the flag, eyes burning, then looks at Ridge once more. I'll always love her, he whispers. Ridge's reply is a bare exhalation, a choked, I know. Nick bows his head, then turns toward the stairs, each step a farewell to the life he had glimpsed with Brooke, to the dreams they had dared to share. At the top of the stairwell, he pauses and glances back at Ridge and Taylor, silhouettes framed in the firelight, two pillars of a world shattered by one reckoning truth. Brooke is gone. Outside, as Nick's SUV glides away, Ridge's voice carries after him. Nick. He stops, glancing toward the window, and Ridge continues. You're welcome here, always. Nick nods, though Ridge cannot see. Thank you, he replies, voice distant as the house recedes behind him. The Pacific wind draws up off the bay, carrying with it the faint echo of Brooke's laughter, a reminder that some lights, even when extinguished, linger in the memory of those who loved them. Ridge stands in the living room long after Nick has gone, Taylor's hand finding his once more, and together they face the empty room where Brooke's presence once reigned. The future of Forrester Creations hangs in the balance, the startup contract still unresolved, the company's survival threatened by uncertainty and financial exposure. Yet in this moment, the risk of rebuilding a life without Brooke eclipses every business concern. Ridge closes his eyes and lets the grief wash over him like the tide, inevitable, unstoppable, before exhaling and opening them to meet Taylor's steadfast gaze. She would want us to carry on, he says quietly. Taylor nods, tears glistening on her lashes. Together, she affirms. On the distant shore, waves crash in rhythmic remembrance, and beyond them, the sun sets on a day that no family in Los Angeles will ever forget. In the silent ache that follows, Ridge and Taylor find their purpose anew. To honor Brooke's legacy by rebuilding the empire she helped sustain, to protect Hayes and Douglas with the fierce love she taught them, and to forge ahead in the knowledge that some chapters must end so that new ones can begin. The night is black around them, but somewhere beyond the darkness, a faint star flickers steady, eternal, reminding them that love endures, even after the brightest light has faded.